Hi, my name is Craig Vaughan from Matt Mortgage Brokers, and this presentation is on temporary resident home loans. Can you get approved whilst on a temporary resident visa? The short answer is yes, you can be approved on a temporary resident visa. The key is really that different policy and criteria applies depending on the type of visa you're on and your situation. And the main difference in policy from one bank to another is how much deposit will you need. That is probably the main question we get here at MAP. How much deposit? What's the minimum deposit you need on your type of visa? So on this page here, you'll see that there's a quick breakdown there. So you'll see that if you're purchasing with an Australian citizen or permanent resident, married and you're on a spouse visa, married or de facto, or even if you're on a 457 visa, that's okay as well. As long as you're buying with an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, then a 5% deposit plus costs is all that would be required, providing everything else is equal. If you're purchasing without a citizen or a permanent resident, so say you're on a 457, 475, 487 or a 495 visa, you'll see that a 10% plus costs is required. And if you're on a bridging visa, student visa, some other sort of visa, 422 visa for example, then a 20% deposit plus costs would be required. Here's just a quick breakdown of how that looks in New South Wales or Victoria for someone that's on a spouse visa or purchasing with an Australian citizen or permanent resident. You only need a 5% deposit. In New South Wales at the moment there is a stamp duty concession that runs out at the end of this year, end of 2011. So as of January 2012 you will pay full stamp duty, but currently government fees and stamp duty is only $291 for a $500,000 purchase in New South Wales. So in New South Wales you need $25,000, which is your 5% deposit, your government stamp duty fees, purchasing costs, solicitors, rates adjustments, things like that. It gives you a total required that $27,291, less a first homeowner's grant means you need around $20,000. In Victoria, same deposit required, but there's no stamp duty concessions in Victoria. So in Victoria they're going to charge you around $23,000 in stamp duty and government fees, meaning the total deposit of your own you would require is approximately $43,000. I note that there are options if you've got the 5% deposit and you've saved that up over 3 months or saved it up over a period of time. We can, on a case-by-case, borrow the stamp duty. Okay, so if you've got $25,000, don't have enough for your stamp duty or fees, well then potentially we can borrow that if you're a good, strong applicant. Here's where you find out how to work out stamp duty. If you go to mattmortgagebrokers.com/calculators, you'll find a number of calculators there. One of those is a stamp duty calculator, and all you do is select which state you're looking at buying in. Here it's ACT, type in the value of the property, and whether it's going to be primary residence or a first home buyer, and it tells you then how much the grant is and how much stamp duty is. So if you're a first home buyer in ACT, buying your own place there for $350,000, you'd be looking at a stamp duty government fees of $314,000. Does the deposit need to be genuine savings? Look, genuine savings is essentially a bank requirement and is normally required if you don't have a 20% deposit. So if you've got a smaller deposit than 20%, then some banks will require that you have saved those funds up or held in the bank account for 3 months. So what I mean by that is what they're trying to avoid is you going out and getting a personal loan, for example, or a gift from mum and dad. They're trying to avoid that sort of thing. However, there are exceptions. So if you get a gift from mum and dad and put that in the bank account for 3 months, that will be considered genuine savings. If you've been renting for a year and perfect repayment history on the perfect rental history renting, well then some banks don't care where your savings come from. So if you've been renting for a year and you got a gift for $20,000, that's your 5%. That would be quite acceptable. So as a general rule, you do need genuine savings, but there are a number of exceptions now. And look, some banks at the moment don't even require genuine savings at all. So there are some exceptions. General requirements to be approved on a temporary resident visa. Look, minimum deposit, we've discussed that, 5% for those purchasing with citizens or permanent residents, 10% for those on 457, 475, 487 or a 495 visa, and 485 visa, and 20% for anyone on a bridging visa or a student visa, or any other sort of bridging visa, something like that. Clean credit history. Look, you generally need clean credit history here in Australia. They don't check your overseas history unless you're from New Zealand. So clean credit history in Australia. We can do some exceptions to that. For example, if you've got an unpaid, if you had a default listed on your credit file for an unpaid Telstra bill or something like that. That's very common. If it's sort of under it's only a few $100s, we can generally get that overlooked. And obviously, the bigger the deposit you have, the less tight the bank is. So if you've got a 20% deposit, but you've got a $2,000 credit default, that's something we can do. That's fine. But if you've got a $2,000 credit default and only a 5% deposit, well, you're probably going to struggle to get approved with that. You need good employment history. Most people on a 457 visa or any one of those professional visas won't have an issue with that, but generally what they're looking at is 6 months in the current job or 2 years in the same line of work. There are exceptions. There's plenty of times where people are approved in 2 weeks in their current job, but 2 years previous in history in the same sort of work. So if you're professional, they can be very lenient on those sort of things. And you need a positive asset position. That is, you don't have more debt than you have net assets. So if you had, for example, if you've got a $20,000 personal loan, where you would need $20,000 in savings, your car, any sort of assets like that to outweigh that 20 grand. A couple of frequently asked questions: is the first homeowners grant available? It is if you're purchasing with an Australian citizen or permanent resident, it is. If you're on a visa, it's not. However, we have had some success in the past. If you get your permanent residency within 1 year after purchasing the property, we have had some success in getting the first homeowners grant approved. However, don't rely on it. Don't rely on the first homeowners grant if you do not have permanent residency or citizenship at the time of purchasing the property. Are interest rates higher? No, they're not. So there's no. Essentially, what happens here is each bank has their own policy. If you just have a number of banks to go to, and they're mainstream lenders, they're not charging higher rates or anything like that, and they're certainly not charging you a higher rate because you're on a visa or anything like that. And do you need FIRB approval? If you are purchasing with Australian citizen or permanent resident, you do not. Otherwise, you will require FIRB approval. It's nothing to be worried about, and we'll sort of walk you through that process. The advantages of a temporary resident home loan pre-approval. Look, your next step, if you're looking to really start looking for property, then you need to get a temporary resident pre-approval. It's completely free. There's no obligation to take the finance. It lasts 3 to 6 months, and essentially it locks away your approval. So it confirms that the bank's going to lend you the money, and all you've got to now do is go out and find the property. So it saves you sort of wasting your time looking at property, getting your hopes up. It gets your pre-approval locked away, and it also speeds up the formal approval process. So once you've found a property, all the work's really been done. Also can give you some more negotiating power. A lot of vendors like to hear that you are pre-approved. Summary: MAP is a free service, as we've talked about. If one applicant's a citizen or a permanent resident, then generally a 5% deposit minimum will be required. If no applicant holds permanent residency, then the general rule is you need a 20% deposit. But if you're on a 457, 475, 487 or a 495 visa, then you can get away with just a 10% deposit, everything else being equal. Genuine savings is generally required if your deposit is smaller than 20%, but there are exceptions to that now. FIRB approval may be required. And what to do next? Well, next step is if you want some help with your temporary resident home loan, want to look at a pre-approval or discuss your situation further, you can email us, call us, Skype us, you can chat live online, you can do a quick inquiry or a pre-approval inquiry with some further details on the website. My name's Craig Vaughan. There's my direct email and my direct line and my Skype address as well. Thank you for your time, and any questions again, please feel free to email, call us, or go to the website. Bye for now.